Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
What's all this talk about Indigenous ways of knowing? Why should a school for Native American students seek to develop measurements of student achievement based on Indigenous knowledge systems? Let's talk to someone who can help us appreciate this complex topic. Hello, Mitakiepi, and welcome to Hochoka here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian Schools campus. I'm Scott Wooster, your Hochoka host. Today we are joined by Dr. Melanie Nadeau, Graduate Program Director and Assistant Professor at the Indigenous Health PhD program at the University of North Dakota Grand Forks School of Medicine and Health Sciences. She is an enrolled citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in Belcourt, North Dakota. We got to know her in episode 1 this season, and we have her back today to talk about the work she is doing with us to implement an Indigenous evaluation framework for our programs. The reason that we have you here today, as you well know, is because we're talking about developing new measurements of student achievement that are based on Indigenous knowledge system. And the idea is to meet the students that we have. The students here at St. Joe's are Indigenous students, and we're trying to meet them in a culturally intentional way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So today I want to set the stage for our audience that we talk to here by exploring the differences between Western science and Indigenous or traditional Native knowledge systems. I think this key is very important for us as we seek to improve the programs that we have here on campus. So for those who need a little explanation of that worldview, in something that I read to get ready for today and for this conversation that we'll have, there's a word cloud exercise that you do with students. And for me, the results of that exercise actually are a pretty accurate illustration of that worldview. Long introduction. Can you walk us through what that might mean to you?
When we talk about Indigenous knowledge systems, we want to start with what people value.
Okay.
We have 570 plus federally recognized tribes in the United States. That does not include state recognized tribes, and that does not include those who are still fighting for recognition, and that does not include those who were annihilated. So there's a lot of diversity. And
Absolutely.
I try to explain to people that Native people are the smallest population in the United States. However, we are the most diverse population in the United States.
Yep.
And so tribes differ in their resources, in their language, their culture, their cultural practices. So you're going to see a lot of differences in the way. There are similarities across that resonate, but each tribe is unique in their own way.
Right.
And the approach to the work needs to be unique. And when you're, even myself as a tribal member, if I'm working with other tribes, I have to inquire and say, okay, how do you want to start this out? What do you value? And then how do those values translate to the work that you're doing? And that's where we start.
Okay.
And from there, then we start to determine how the work is going to look. And so you always have to go back to the values.
Yep.
And then that'll resonate through everything that you do.
Now, specifically with the cloud exercise, how does that begin to work into to bring about that worldview or to help people express those values?
So the cloud exercise is a lot of fun. We've used it in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that we've used it is I was asked to come in and work with tribes to facilitate conversations around historical trauma and resilience. And it was a listening session, and there was multiple tribes there represented. It was a regional meeting, and I was asked to facilitate this conversation and skip introductions. And I said, you cannot skip introductions.
Yeah.
I know it's terrifying because we have 60 people that are going to be there.
Right.
We only have 2 days.
Yep.
And introductions can be quite lengthy. So we came up with a strategy that could honor that process, but still get us through in a timely manner.
Right, right.
And so I passed out 3x5 cards, me and my student, and we asked the members that were there, the tribal members, we said, okay, you don't have to be an artist, but can you draw us a picture of who you are and what's important to you and what you value? And the pictures that emerged from that process included animals, the land, because we're a people of a place. So that came out, cultural imaging, family, hobbies. So really getting to the core of who a person is and what's important to them.
Right, right.
And the introductions, we had a slide up, your name, your tribe, what program you work for, describe what's on your card.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting through 60 introductions in an hour.
Yeah.
Which was amazing.
Yeah.
And we ended up gathering such rich information from that process that my student was there just grabbing the keywords
Yeah.
and punching them into this cloud.
Yep.
And then you could see all what was important as a collective emerge.
Yep. Yep.
And family, culture,
Yeah.
connectedness. I mean, all of these things rose to the top, and it's really a powerful thing to
Yeah.
go through that process with a group of people.
Absolutely.
In a very precise way, you're able to identify the strengths of the collective.
Mm-hmm.
And when you operate from strengths, people, it's uplifting.
Yep.
It helps, to move the agenda forward. People are excited. They're engaged.
What I'm wondering is, there's a distinction between a Western linear view and the Indigenous worldview. Can you explain that for us?
It really does come down to the philosophy of how you look at life and why you're doing what you're doing and why it's important. I'll bring it to a Western institution level. So most students have to go through the institutional review board when they do research, right? All students do.
Yeah.
And so for, my classmates, they had to go to the University of Minnesota Institutional Review Board to get approval. I had to do the same thing. But since I'm serving my tribal community, I also had to go through the Tribal Institutional Review Board. Now, the Tribal Institutional Review Board looks at things differently than the mainstream institutional review boards.
Right.
And so when you look at research from a research perspective, the institutional review boards really focused in on individual protections. The Tribal Research Review Board is focused in on community level protections.
Okay.
How is this impacting our community? How is this impacting our culture? And what are the risks to our people as a whole? And so it's a totally different perspective when you bring things into that realm.
Yeah.
And so I had to get approval from not only the University of Minnesota Institutional Review Board, I had to get approval from the Tribal Research Review Board and ensure that I was covering those community protections. I had to get a resolution with the tribe. I had to get approval from the Indian Health Service Institutional Review Board. They deemed if I had to get national approval, and I had to also get a letter of accommodation from the CEO of the Indian Health Service, just to do my research with my people.
Right.
And a lot of these things weren't put in place just because of Native researchers coming in. It's because of what happened in the past with, harms done to our people through research.
Yeah, manipulations.
Yeah. But I think a lot of what happened with the research is, how do we move forward from that? Well, we really need to respect and ground ourselves in the work that we're doing when we're working with Native peoples in their worldview and their perspective. And it really does come down to what they look at things holistically, like for the health, holistic health, mind, spirit, body, emotional health, your heart health, love. When I was working with tribal communities and I say, what do you value? Love always was there.
Yeah.
Love was always present.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you translate that into the work that you do? And so when you're doing the work in that way, it's a lot different than just looking at, what leads, what's impacting this person dying from cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go into a tribal community and work, like I'm a community-led scholar, so my community leads all of the work that I do. So I'll come in and I'll say, hey, I have some ideas for doing the work that we're doing. What do you think? And they're, well, we think you should do it this way. One of the things, there's certain things that happen when you're working with Native people. One of the things that's really foundational and important at its core is ensuring the involvement of elders in all decision-making processes, ensuring the involvement of the youth. And so this is really foundational to the worldview. It's the 7th generation principle. So 7 generations, what is going to be the impact of what I'm doing now?
Right.
And so really thinking long term, what impact the work that you're having is going to do, and then also honoring the past and bringing in that collective knowledge from the past into the work that you do. So the work is really grounded in community knowledge and systems.
Yep. And
mainstream, you don't see that.
No.
I was at an event and somebody was challenging, it was on artificial intelligence. Somebody was challenging and saying, well, why are you doing this? Why is it important? Well, save time and to make more money. Well, if you ask, you go into a tribal community and you're going to get a completely different answer.
Right.
Because it's focused on the health and well-being of the community, honoring the past, thinking about the future.
Yeah.
And so when you ground yourself in that philosophy, the work that you do is going to be completely different than being so detached and removed from who we are as human beings.
Yeah. Here we are at St. Joe's at an Indigenous school, and we're trying to evaluate Indigenous children here at this school. They don't fit easily into state tests, state standards, things that you could call them biased, but it's a Western way or linear way of looking at things. And so the test becomes for you to provide us with ways or give us examples and help of how to evaluate just a little bit different through Indigenous standards, something that's going to cater to our population a little bit more. What does that look like?
Well, I think it's really important to understand and look at the history of how research has been done. Mm-hmm. So Native people really haven't been historically involved in the process of creating the tools, of collecting the data. So that's problematic.
And an understatement, too.
Yeah. It's very problematic. And so when I went to school, I said, I had to create an elevator statement for a program that I was in at one point. And I literally got on the elevator and, tried to say what I had to say before the doors closed. Like I did this for real.
Okay.
And I settled on that I want to create culturally grounded interventions in hopes of closing the health disparities gap. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, that was almost 20 years ago that I came up with that statement. But I didn't realize that when I went to school that I couldn't just go get trained to do interventions. Mm-hmm. When I was in school, I realized that many times we weren't even included in the data. We weren't even on the slide.
Yeah.
And when we were, the data was really bad.
Yep.
So I'm a trained social behavioral epidemiologist. Mm-hmm. And I look at the strengths and weaknesses of the data collection process itself. And it was just horrible.
Right.
And the data that we have is just horrible. And so we haven't had the privilege of having the investment to do and collect data in a meaningful way for our communities. And so many times initiatives, funders, they assume that we're at the same spot. Mm-hmm. We're not.
Right.
And data is sovereignty. Data is power. Mm-hmm. Data is what helps get you the resources you need. And so it's foundational to everything that we do. So we really have to invest and build our capacity there. When I was in school and I worked on my dissertation, This is crazy. I wouldn't recommend this for anybody, but I did a case control study with my tribe. And I looked at breast cancer, and I looked at over 400 records. And I looked at the clinical file, the electronic health record, the radiology file. And my hypothesis was that the risk factors for breast cancer would be the same, but they would vary in magnitude. And so when I did the research, and I went back to everybody in Turtle Mountain, looked all the way back. I think, if I recall correctly, my oldest case file she was born in 1902. And so, and I did this multinomial logistic regression looking at these risk factors for breast cancer, and I threw a couple of extra factors in, and here I found out that those are not the risk factors for breast cancer in our community. People say, well, what are they? I don't know.
Yeah.
We need to do more research,
right,
because
exactly.
That's not what I thought I was going to find.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, and when you think about breast cancer, billions of dollars have been invested in studying and researching breast cancer, but that hasn't happened with tribal communities. And so that is a real practical, example of why we need to go to ground zero and say, okay, hey, we need to work with the community so they can create their data collection tools, measures that are important to them, to see what is going to not only identify the factors that are driving, poor health outcomes, but also so that we can invest in protective factor rich environments to support the health and well-being of the community. And so that part is just as important, if not more important, than identifying the risk.
Yep. And you use the term ground zero, and you beat me to the punch, because I was going to say the same thing. I mean, that as you were talking, that's what I felt was that you were starting off asking, not only collecting data, but you were asking questions that just hadn't been asked. And when I said understatement earlier, I mean, in a lot of cases, those questions hadn't been probably allowed to be asked,
exactly.
Right? You just couldn't ask them.
There wasn't space.
Yeah.
There wasn't, the conversation has never been,
right.
It just hasn't happened. So we're just now being brought to the table in this meaningful way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I love it. And I one thing that I'm really captivated by in this session in particular is the fact that you did take something from that point, and here we are, 20 some years later.
Yep.
And you're passionate about it. Your energy level is high, and you're ready, to get out there and make a difference and do something with this. Starting from that level, you're the expert in the field.
Yes.
And so here we are, and I get to have you on the show and we get to talk about it, which is just great. And so we're going to continue this conversation. We'll continue it in the next part, and we're going to dig in even more about what that means, how those numbers work, and what that can actually do to help us with what we do here and help people that you work with in what they do. So
sounds great.
And thank you to our audience and our viewers here at Ho-Chokeh, where we talk about issues that are central to Native American education today. Until next time, stay centered.